Is it ethical to make someone work every moment of their life without sleep or showers or pets?
So I'll never leave here.
They don't even have an office cat in Severance. This is hell. I was born a hater. Then I discovered television. Dark reviews. My name is Hayley Dark and we're going to be talking about Severance, Season 1. This show is mysterious and important. It's kind of like the TV show Lost. Whenever they answer one question, you'll be left with two more. Just look at how they introduce the show to the viewers. A woman wakes up on the table and a mysterious voice asks her, "Who are you?"
Who are you?
Well, who is she? She doesn't know. She seems disoriented and looks for a way out of the room, but there isn't one, and the mysterious voice wants her to take a survey of 5 questions. Question number 1. Who are you? She has no idea. Question number 2. Where were you born? She also has no idea. Question number 3. Name a US state.
Am I?
I don't know. Delaware.
Delaware? There's no chance that the first US state someone thinks of is freaking Delaware. She doesn't know the next 2 questions either. The door opens and the mysterious voice is revealed to be Adam Scott, the guy you know from The Good Place and Parks and Rec. After the scene, you were left with many questions like, why doesn't she know who she is? And why was she asked these 5 specific questions? And most importantly, why did they put her on a table? They couldn't put her in a chair or something? They had to put her on a table? Ridiculous. It's never canonically explained why she's on the table, but the creator of the show said that it's to disorient her, which is, rude. So this guy is named Mark S. Let's talk about the pilot. We go back in time to see Mark have a healthy cry in his car. Now why is he crying? Because his hair does not suit Adam Scott's face at all. He looks pretty good here, but in the car, he does not. He goes to work and he walks past this sign. This is also the first time we hear the piano instrumental that plays a lot during the show and also plays during the intro sequence. Noteworthy is that the elevator goes down, as in underground, and whenever someone steps into the elevator as a viewer, you will hear a whooshing sound to indicate that something is different. And he is different. When Mark steps out of the elevator, he is no longer sad. Mark works his way through a maze of hallways, and when I say maze, oh, I mean maze. It's a freaking labyrinth down here. The department that Mark works at is called Macro Data Refinement, or short MDR. Did you get all that? You better be paying attention. Mark has some small talks with 2 co-workers called Dylan and Irving. That's Dylan and that's Irving. While they are talking, we are seeing what they are working on. There's mysterious file names and mysterious numbers. What do the numbers mean? We don't know. The pilot introduces so many mysteries in the first few scenes, I personally find it very intriguing. 2 things are of note in the scene. First, they mention perks for finishing files, like a waffle party, and by the way, I want waffles. And second, they mention someone named Petey who is not currently at work. And yes, that's Petey with the Y. A guy named Mr. Milchick walks in and he looks like their boss. Mr. Milchick, this is Mr. Milchick, and he takes Mark all the way to the hallways to right here, Mrs. Cobell's office. This is Harmony Cobell, and she looks to be the real boss around here. That is, until she puts a speaker on the table and the actual real boss is revealed to be the board. The board, I assume, is the board of directors, and I don't have a card to put on my map, so you're just gonna have to imagine them, okay? They are like a radio with a camera inside of it. That's them, that's the board. So is Mark getting fired? No, he's getting a promotion. Because Petey used to be the department head of MDR, but he no longer works there. So Mark moves up in the chain. Good for you, Mark. And then Mr. Milchick says this.
I'm sorry, Mark. You guys were one of my favorite office friendships.
You're not supposed to ship people in real life, Mr. Milchick. Those are the rules. Someone get this man the memo. So Mark gets promoted to department chief of MDR. And also to serve someone named Kier. What's that about? We don't know. Mark is told to do a training, and here, 17 minutes into the pilot, we finally get to see what the opening scene was about. This time, we get to see the interaction from Mark's perspective. Notably, Mr. Milchick says she deserves to have the information presented to her in the proper order, just as you had. Does that mean Mark was also once on this table? Yes, it does. So after the survey is done, Mark walks in and the woman asks him, am I livestock? Luckily for us, she is not food. We learn that her name is Hayley. Hayley R. Mark says that Hayley is hired for a position on the 7th floor at Lumen Industries. Now Lumen is the company that they work for, and if you watch the show, you will see the name and logo branded everywhere you look. Oh, and next, this happens.
Imagine yourself as a seesaw. Ow!
Honestly, I think it's deserved because Mark was using corporate speak and that annoys people. Hayley calms down and then Mark starts talking to her in a normal voice, like when he tells her that he wanted to murder the voice back when he was on the table. Very normal of you, Mark, and also foreshadowing? I think so. Hayley asks to leave and they walk her all the way to the staircase. There's also a fire extinguisher in this corner and that's important for a future episode. So Hayley tries to leave via the staircase but she's instantly back into the hallway like magic. She then tries to leave a couple more times and keeps coming back. Is this a magic show? I wish it was a magic show. Hayley gives up and asks Mark if she is in hell and then Mark lies and says no. But I think she is in hell because this place is the worst. The final part of Hayley's orientation comes in the form of a video, which tells us exactly what's going on here. So in the Severance universe, there's this medical procedure called Severance, where one's work memories and their life memories become separate. The work person won't have access to the memories from the life person, and the life person won't have access to the memories from the work person. These are then referred to as outies and innies. And the innies don't have any memories from before they were severed, which is why Hayley didn't know her own name. She has no memories whatsoever. She's baby. How it works is that when Hayley leaves the building, outie Hayley will take over and do stuff at home. And then when outie Hayley comes back into work, innie Hayley will take over and start doing work. So for innie Hayley, it's as if no time has passed. Basically, she spends her entire life 9 to 5 at work, and when she leaves, she is instantly back at work. Basically, hell. Hayley doesn't know if she has any family, and neither do the rest of the severed workers. What's important to note here is that they stagger the severed workers so that there is 5 minutes between the exits and the entrances of each of the severed members. That way, they do not meet outside of work. Why is this important? We don't know yet. Maybe it will trigger their memories from inside. They don't show Hayley's first workday, which I find an odd choice, but maybe the orientation just took so long that there's barely any time left in the day. Maybe it was not worth showing, I don't know. When Mark gets out of work, his outie receives a note. Dear Mark, whilst carrying boxes in a room today, you slipped on an overhead projected slide and sustained a minor blow to the temple. Blah blah blah, gift card. So they're just lying to him. Hayley threw something at him and they don't tell him at all what's going on. That's sus. Okay, something shady is going on at his company. But he doesn't know. And then he almost hit outie Hayley with the car, which, after seeing episode 4, I kind of wish he did hit her. Mark's outie has a sister named Devon. He also has a brother-in-law named Rickon. We get the sweet dinner party scene where there's no food and a bunch of obnoxious, irrelevant people.
You know, what a lot of people overlook, I think, is that life is not food.
Right.
We learn that Mark's outie used to be a history professor before he worked at Lumen. And also, he used to have a wife named Gemma, but she's dead. Probably why he was crying at the start of the episode. We also learn that outie Mark thinks that he works at the corporate archiving division at Lumen. So basically, he has no idea what this innie does, and Lumen is shady. We also learn that severance is a really controversial decision because essentially your work version is trapped at work, tormented to work their entire life. And honestly, it really is unethical to do that, which is why I also understand that people think that people who sever themselves are bad people. But not Mark though, because Mark severed himself because he wanted to forget about his dead wife for 8 hours a day. Which is understandable, I guess, but still unethical. The next day, Petey accosts him at a restaurant and tells Mark that nothing down there is as it seems.
Okay, well, severance is pretty permanent.
Yeah, bypassing the implant wasn't easy. I had help.
Then he gives Mark an address and leaves. How ominous, Petey. In the final part of this episode, we find out that Mrs. Cobell is also Mrs. Selvig, who is outie Mark's neighbor.
You're good people.
Okay, so there's a lot to digest this episode. Dylan and Irving didn't really do much because most of the story was focused on Hayley and Mark, but they will get more story in the future, so don't worry. Some final thoughts on the episode. They have 3 beds for the sister's unborn baby, and I will not explain to you why. The computers they work on at MDR are really old-fashioned. The layout of MDR is really fun. They sit next to each other in this weird quad table setup. Something about the show is that the set design is absolutely amazing. I cannot praise it enough. The set just works so well to make this entire place feel so much more mysterious and surreal. In the second episode, we see outie Hayley get the severance procedure and it's really gross and invasive. We also see the scene where innie Hayley tries to leave via the staircase, but this time from outie Hayley's perspective.
Oh no, I'm trying to leave.
I personally love it when shows incorporate their universe's unique mechanics to try fun ways of storytelling, like that.
Want to give it another shot? Maybe with a little oomph?
The show's intro plays for the first time and it's just fantastic. I feel like it's a bunch of metaphors layered on top of each other that I am too dense to understand, but it's visually stunning, so I enjoy it. Hayley starts her training and we learn about the incentives for refining files, such as erasers, finger traps, caricature portraits, and most importantly, the refiner of the quarter gets a waffle party. Hayley will start her work on the Siena file, which is notably a city in Italy. Dylan is working on the Tumwater file, which is notably a city in Washington. Are they refining data from those cities? Who knows? The work is explained as sorting data, aka refining, into 4 essential categories, which are then distributed evenly into 5 digital buckets. Did you get all that? The 4 categories are later explained to be the 4 tempers, which are woe, frolic, dread, and malice. Did you get all 4? Okay, repeat them back to me. You're wrong. Maybe you need to stint in the break room. So tempers are what the founder of Lumen says, that if you control all 4 of them, you will control yourself and the world. Now what this has to do with sorting data into buckets, nobody knows.
Irv thinks we're cutting swear words out of movies.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
The MDR team plays a classic game of introduce yourself and introduce something about yourself, which is not only an introvert's worst nightmare, it's also something you would think you wouldn't have to play if you don't have any memories.
I'm sorry, I don't know anything about myself.
Well, sure you do, Hayley.
Mr. Milchick is his usual ominous and slightly unnerving self during this game, and he tells us that the elevators have code detectors, so Hayley takes this to heart, except she doesn't because she proclaims she quits, writes it on the note and goes straight for the elevator. Hayley rightfully believes that the code detectors are nonsense and that Mark is dense for not questioning it. But when she gets into the elevator, a red alarm goes off and Mr. Grainer shows up. Mr. Grainer looks evil and Mark looks a bit scared of him. So Mark tells Mr. Grainer that it's his fault that Hayley took a note to the elevator because Mark is a bad teacher. Mr. Grainer then takes Mark right here. This is the break room. I guess Mark's just taking a break then. Pay no attention to the image I put here. I mean, Mark's just taking a break, okay? Nothing ominous happens here. After a time jump, while on a date, Audi Mark runs into a group of protesters called the Whole Mind Collective. And they are protesting Severance because they think Severance is subjugation and imprisonment. And you know what? They're right. Keep going at it, protesters, Mark. You're a sinner. Audi Mark later calls on sick, even though he's not sick, to go to the address that Petey gave to him. But before that happens, Irving is attacked by black goo. You might think that's a joke, but it's not. It's a hallucination. One we later learn is because his Audi is trying to tell him something. What is it? What does it have to do with goo? We don't know. Now you may be wondering, Hayley, why is your hair different? Well, that's because I had to refilm a big portion of this video. For my troubles, please drop a like and subscribe. It would mean so much to me. Audi Mark meets up with Petey and Petey tells him that he has been reintegrated for 2 weeks and also he has been mapping the floor. Me too, Petey. Me too. Petey tells Audi Mark what happens in the break room. Turns out it's not a room where you take a break, it's a room where they break you. This show will do that a lot. They have words that say one thing but actually mean another. Petey appears to have reintegration sickness and will stay in Mark's basement for a while. Irving's hallucination is seen as dozing off at work, so he gets sent right here. This is Wellness, and here he meets Bert, who is played by Christopher Walken. He is also visiting Wellness. Later in the episode, Dylan says this.
You didn't tell him where we are, did you?
No.
I'm asking for the safety of this department.
Dylan seems to think that this guy is sus. He also has a green key card instead of a blue one. He is from a department called Optics and Design, and where is this on the map? We don't know. They also mention a team building space, and where is that on the map? We don't know. Irving goes into Wellness with Mrs. Casey. This is Mrs. Casey and Wellness is just ridiculous. To make the Indies feel better, she says stuff like this.
Your Audi is generous. Your Audi is fond of music and owns many records. Your Audi is a friend to children.
He better not be.
Your Audi values water.
That's so relatable. At the end of this episode, Hayley successfully refines her first piece of data. Something to note this episode is that Irving seems to be a stickler for the rules, while Dylan seems very invested in the perks that he can get by doing well in files. The set design of the severed floor is interesting. There's quotes all around from the founder of Lumen. There's also a bunch of paintings around. For example, one in Wellness depicts the founder of Lumen, Keir Egan, taming the 4 tempers. You remember the names of the tempers, right?
Admiring the art while I wait.
Optics and Design apparently chooses which paintings hang where, and also the food packaging looks very minimalistic and is very Lumen branded. In the 3rd episode, PD says that reintegration is messing with his memories. He says that his first day at Lumen is as far back as his 5th birthday. This makes sense because for an innie, the first day at work is the first day of life. He asks Mark, don't you want to know what you're doing down there? You could be hurting people and not even know it. That's a convincing argument, Mr. PD. I would want to know. He also found a department where nobody gets to leave. Not just the way that innies don't get to leave, but people who don't leave the building at all. What exactly is going on at Lumen? Audi Mark, who apparently has a goldfish, turns on the television and sees a story about a severed worker who got pregnant at work. I guess that's also a risk when you're severed. You just don't know if your innie is fraternizing with co-workers. PD says that innie Mark would sometimes come into work with red eyes. He says that even though he didn't know what it was, innie Mark felt the death of Audi Mark's wife too. At work, Hayley reveals that she put in a resignation request yesterday and it promptly gets denied, much to Hayley's dismay. It seems her Audi wants her to work even though she doesn't want to. Hayley goes to the bedroom and tries to write a message on her arms. She writes it on both arms to try and get past the code detectors, but Mark says that won't work.
Does this look like lettering to you?
Well, if you put your arms together. Huh, not bad.
Irving overhears this conversation because he was standing outside the bedroom like a creep. He then suggests that they go to the perpetuity ring.
Against the door or to the side?
I think either's really good.
Rickon, Mark's brother-in-law, leaves a copy of his newest book on Mark's front porch. Then Mrs. Selvig quickly steals it. She also enters Mark's house and steals a bunch of his dead wife's stuff. Little thief. She then takes Rickon's book to the 7th floor and gives it to Mr. Milchick. Big mistake, Mrs. Cobell. You will come to regret this. Did I mention that Mrs. Cobell kind of looked like that lady from the Hunger Games? I mean, same hair, same clothes, same person. She is also hilariously annoying towards Mark.
Why would you? Open or closed?
Both.
She then gets a visit from Natalie, who seems to speak with and for the board. Mrs. Cobell tells them that PD might have been reintegrated, which we already know he is, but they tell her that's not possible. Hayley tries to swallow a message but gets caught by Mark just in time because if she had succeeded, it would have been Mr. Milchick's job to extract it from her, which sounds disgusting. The team goes to the perpetuity ring and Irving tells a bunch of boring stories about the CEOs of the company who are all from the same family, the Egans, all the way back to the founder of the company, Keir Egan. The team runs into 2 people, Bert and an unknown lady from Optics and Design. They say that they came from team building. Now, team building could be another double meaning word. They say that they were doing team building exercises like egg drops, but maybe they were actually building a team down there.
Egg drop challenge in the team building space.
There's a lot of theories online about Lumen cloning people. Maybe this is where those clones were built. Dylan is quite mean to them and so they leave. Then he tells the team that O&D once tried to commit a violent coup where they tried to eat members of MDR. And that's why all the departments are so far apart now. This seems like speculation though. Right? The team arrives here, the perpetuity ring. This is James Egan, the current CEO of the company. This seems like the place where they indoctrinate all the innies about how great the Egans are. In the perpetuity ring is a scary wall with pictures of mouths that I'm not going to show you for your mental health. There's also a replica of Keir Egan's house down here, which makes you wonder just how big this place is and also makes you wonder, maybe PD was right. Maybe some people really do live down here. Irving gets mad at Mark because Mark is treating this place like the joke that it is. And while this is happening, Hayley runs all the way from the perpetuity ring to the staircase to try and get a message to her Audi. Hayley gets taken to the break room and here we find out what happens in the break room.
Forgive me for the harm I have caused this world.
All you have to do is apologize for what you've done. Seems simple, right?
I'm afraid you don't mean it.
Do it again. 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 Oh, I'm afraid you don't mean it. Again. Innie Mark finds the map that PD left for him. This is the map that you see behind me here. It's a rather unclear and messy map and honestly, PD is kind of a bad mapper, but also it looks really cool, so thank you, PD. Also, Petey leaves Mark's house to go for a snack and then he dies. And Audie and Mark witnesses it. At home, Audie and Mark finds a phone that Petey left and it's buzzing. The episode ends here. Something to note this episode is that Dylan thinks his Audie is doing muscle shows because his shoulders are always sore. Why is his Audie doing heavy lifting? We don't know. Mr. Milchick leaves Rickon's book in an unknown conference room to deal with the Hayley situation. This becomes important in the next episode. In episode 4, Audie Mark ignores the buzzing of the phone. Now why would he do this? To delay the plot, of course. Bert shows up to MDR and Dylan is ready to throw hands.
Hi.
It's important to understand here that Dylan has only met like 4 to 6 people in his entire life, so it's understandable that he's a bit wary of strangers, especially if those strangers might be cannibals. Irving, however, is swooning where he stands, and he takes Bert up on his offer to go to O&D. While Irving is out, Hayley returns and reveals that she had to apologize 1,072 times. That's insane! But also, that's a really good way to avoid doing work. Just keep apologizing, never mean it, and eventually you're not doing any work, so they have to let you go, right? I mean, they can't physically harm you. Hayley could just not do any of the work. I mean, what are they gonna do, fire you? That's what she wants. Irving wanders the hallways to a map that Bert left him. And where is that? The green hallways. The fans don't actually know where Petey's map and Bert's map align, so I just made an educated guess and put it over here. And then Irving gets to here. O&D is where the paintings are stored and Bert distributes those paintings to the 7th floor and they get rotated to each department until eventually they get back to O&D. Bert and Irving talk amongst the paintings until they get a little bit too close to each other and they panic. The special kind of panic that only happens when 2 men get a little bit too intimate. And predictably, Irving runs off.
I have to go.
Don't you just love queer romance stories? On his way back, Irving comes across the conference room where last episode Mr. Milchick left Rickon's book, and Irving finds it. Hayley finds the map that Petey left for Mark because Mark is bad at hiding stuff. And Dylan says you're not supposed to make maps because...
I thought we weren't supposed to make maps.
Why aren't we supposed to map the office?
It's an Egan rule, render not my creation in miniature.
This rule does not apply to me because, well... Does this look miniature to you? The team gets into a fight and Mark says this iconic line.
The work is mysterious and important.
Irving storms in and they go to the conference room and they find an inscription in the book that says it's addressed to Mark. What happens next is iconic. Hayley storms into Mrs. Cowell's office with the paper cutting thing from the printer and she threatens to cut off her fingers. Unless she gets to film a video for her Audi. She succeeds in her threats and gets to make a video for her Audi that she takes into the elevator. Smart move, Hayley. Very respectable.
Guess this is the part where I should tell you to go to hell. Except you're already here. I was never sorry.
Unfortunately, she ends up right back here with a message from her Audi.
I am a person. You are not.
I am a person. You are not. I mean, that's freaking cold. Audi Hayley is a bad person. But also, she has a suspicious lack of respect for her fingers, because what's to stop Hayley from simply cutting them off anyways? She does not want to be here, and for an innie, being fired is the same as dying. So it's a really risky move for Audi Hayley to just put her back here when she does not value her own life. There is a side plot where Audi, Mark and Mrs. Selvig go to Petey's funeral and Mrs. Selvig retrieves the severance chip from Petey's body. Also, she seems interested in whether or not Mark recognizes Petey. They also meet Petey's daughter and it's quite sad. Rest in peace, Petey. You will be missed. Innie Mark reads Rickon's book on the toilet and it actually has some good words.
Your job needs you, not the other way around.
Mrs. Cobell sends Mark to wellness. She puts a candle there that she stole from Mark's house and it's from Mark's dead wife. She's trying to see if Innie Mark sparks any memories from Audi Mark's wife. During his wellness session, Mark gets to sculpt with clay. And I feel bad for Irving because Irving did not get to do that. And who doesn't want to play with clay? What a wholesome way to end this episode. Hold on. Hayley did what? But before we get to that, Irving made up with Bert Yes, made up, not made out. He made up and he discovers that there's more than 2 people working in O&D. So Bert lied to him. Hayley is eating peanuts in this episode, which got me thinking. She is allergic to almonds, so if she wants to stop working permanently, maybe she could find some almonds on the floor. And for some reason, Mrs. Cobell has finger traps on in this scene. You do you, girl.
Have you heard from the board yet?
No.
I cannot praise the set design of the show enough. Most of the show is set in this blue and white color tint, so when Rickon's book shows up and it's in red and yellow, you know that it's something special. It's just so well done. Episode 5 is titled The Grim Barbarity of Optics and Design. Now you may be wondering, why is Hayley hanging from the ceiling? Well, you're not the only one, because Audi Hayley is wondering the exact same thing. Hayley uses an extension cord and an entrepreneurial spirit to hang herself from the elevator ceiling. I love this. I think it's brilliant because this morning the not a person evil Audi Hayley stepped onto the elevator and the next thing she knows, she's choking. Hayley wanted to make a statement to her Audi and she sure did. Unfortunately for her, Mark, with the help of Mr. Grainer, rescues her and Mr. Grainer pushes Mark into the elevator and sends him up.
Mark, get in the elevator.
Hayley,
Get in the elevator!
Is she okay? Is she alive?
Have a seat, Mark.
I mean, what a fun scene. Sorry, Hayley.
What I want is for her to wake up while the life drains out of her and to know it was me who did it.
We get a montage of Mark reading the book over the course of days or even weeks, we don't know, but then his sister Devon goes into labor.
Mark, would you help me hang the kelp?
Devon visits her neighbor for some coffee and develops a crush on her. That's right, Devon our bi queen. Innie Hayley returns to work and Mark explains what happened.
So they locked away the extension cords and other dangerous items, so, you should be safe.
There's a fork, Hayley. It's right there. Mrs. Casey from Wellness joins his team this episode to observe Hayley.
Upon request, I can also perform a hug.
Hayley plucks out her eyelashes and this got me thinking. There's so many ways that you could annoy your Audi. You could bite your tongue, for example. That's something I would do. You could bite the inside of your cheek. You could even pee before you get into the elevator. And that's your Audi's problem then. There's just so many things you could do to try and get fired, and you have to resist somehow, right? Irving has another goo attack hallucination and wants to go to Bert because of it. But first, he makes a copy of the map that Bert left him so that the rest of MDR can find him if they need to. However, at the printer, Irving finds a disturbing painting that shows the coup that Dylan was talking about O&D members eating members of MDR. Mr. Milchick suddenly shows up and says that it must have been a mistake, but it seems that he put it there on purpose to make the members of MDR afraid of O&D. The painting has the same name as this episode, The Grim Barbarity of Optics and Design. Mark and Hayley decide to ditch Mrs. Casey and explore the floor, and they run into exactly what you think they would. Baby goats. That's right, there's baby goats on this floor, and this reminds me of the cloning theory. In real life, they cloned a sheep named Dolly. Maybe Lumen is doing it here, but with goats.
They're not ready.
Or maybe Lumen has already stepped up to cloning humans. At least now we know that there actually are office pets on the 7th floor. They're just not allowed to roam around. I wish we could see more of the baby goats, but we don't see them again for the rest of the season. Dylan and Irving also leave MDR, so Mrs. Casey is all alone. They then run into Bert in the conference room and Dylan locks him inside so that they can interrogate him.
If I could just explain.
Save it, Marauder.
I checked the whole storage wing. No sign of him or Hayley.
Shit, O&D's probably killed them already.
Irving, what?
Oh.
Here we learn that O&D think that the members of MDR have pouches like kangaroos. I mean, it's ridiculous. But also, the Indies have no idea how the world works, so it's understandable that they are really gullible. They go to O&D, and while Bert and Irving flirt some more, Dylan finds the painting that Bert said he knew nothing about. But it's actually different because this time it shows the members of MDR committing the coup, and they are the ones eating members of O&D. It's called the Macro Data Refinement Calamity. So it seems that Lumen is trying to make the departments afraid of each other. Bert decides to introduce Irving and Dylan to the other 6 members of his team in O&D.
I want to introduce you all to Irving and Dylan. They're from MDR.
Some final thoughts on this episode. Mark says this about his brother-in-law wanting to use his dead wife's name as middle name for his child.
Your kid deserves her own name without some big, feely baggage.
He's so right. I don't like it when people do this. I love the starting sequence of this episode, and we finally get to explore a little bit of the floor. Also, Mark and Mr. Milchick have this fun exchange.
When she sees you, it's important your eyes be kind. Do you know how to make your eyes kind?
And afterwards, we get this shot. Why is Mark standing there so unnatural and stoic? They talk about a storage wing and where's that on the map? We don't know. Lastly, Irving thinks to cheer up Hayley they should hide inspirational quotes all around the office. And it's so sweet. I mean, you can tell that Irving really cares about his coworkers.
We should hide inspirational handbook quotes around the office for her to stumble upon.
Episode 6 is called Hide and Seek, but they don't actually hide and seek anything this episode, so what's that about, writers? Audi Mark grabs Petey's phone, remember that one from the start of episode 4? Well, he throws it away. Why? To delay the plot. Devon runs into her lady crush from the bird retreat, but her lady crush does not recognize her. This leads Devon to think that she may be severed, and that she severed herself so that she wouldn't have to go through childbirth. Can you imagine that? That Innie exists just to give birth to a child. That's horrible. There's a room planned somewhere where Bert and Irving have some platonic romance time.
The Lumon manual doesn't say anything about lip-to-lip contact.
It does discourage romantic fraternization. Oh,
This can't be romantic, though.
Irving convinces the team to visit O&D, but first they wonder, where is Mrs. Casey? There she is, in the break room. Mrs. Cobell refers to Mrs. Casey as a part-time innie, which is interesting because you would think that the severance procedure is quite invasive for a part-time job.
What is it we actually do here?
We serve here! You child! Get your little ass back to your desk and stay there until you're told to move.
Alfred's management tantrum, the team eventually does a Scooby-Doo walk all the way from MDR to O&D. We get some interaction between the 2 departments and we learn that they also print things like watering cans and hatchets. Mark gives an encouraging speech.
If the Egan philosophy is illumination above all,
Illumination beyond all, but yes.
then why doesn't that include us? Why are we down here still working in the dark?
Well said. Honestly, Mark, no notes. Dylan steals a flashcard from O&D and it seems to be depicting some sort of fighting move. Before they can get further, Mr. Milchick arrives and takes MDR back to their department. But Mark goes to the break room. A little bit later, we see Dylan in a closet along with Mr. Milchick, and they appear to be in Audi Dylan's house. Now you might be wondering, what is Mr. Milchick's Audi's name? Well, it's Mr. Milkshake. That's right. His Audi's name is Mr. Milkshake. Mr. Milkshake is looking for the flashcard that Dylan stole, and this implies that the code detectors, if those are even real, cannot catch the card. Dylan tells Mr. Milkshake where the flashcard is, but then Dylan's son comes in and he hugs him. So at this point, Mr. Milkshake says over the radio, "End it."
Daddy! Daddy!
So it seems that not only does Dylan have a son, but also Lumen has the capability of awakening the innies outside of Lumen property. How useful! This is called the overtime contingency, and I'm sure that the team will not use this knowledge in the future to be rebellious. Surely not. Audi Mark wakes up from cheating on his dead wife, he goes to the garbage and he gets the phone that he threw away from Petey. The phone is still buzzing and he picks up and it's Dr. Rakabi. We learn that this Dr. Rakabi is the same one that actually put the severance chip inside of Mark's head. She is now going against Lumen and she leads Mark to the school that they used to teach at. Some fun things about this episode is that Mrs. Selvig has an Egan shrine inside of her house. It shows that she went to the Myrtle Egan School for Girls. She must have been indoctrinated to worship Kier Egan from a young age. Speaking of Mrs. Selvig, she goes to Devon's house and offers to help with the baby. She keeps involving herself more and more with Mark's life. They also install new doors on MDR so that they will stop wandering around and actually do their work. So much for exploring, I guess. And like I mentioned, They don't actually play hide and seek in this episode. They have a gigantic maze and they don't play hide and seek in it. This could have been so much fun. This is why it's my least favorite episode. I have been misled and the writers have disappointed me. I'm sending them to the break room.
I'm afraid you don't mean it.
Episode 7 starts like this.
You brought him into this world without his permission, based on your own desire for emotional convenience.
That does seem kind of unethical, doesn't it? Bringing someone into this world just to suffer? It's just like having a baby. Mr. Grainer walks in and Dr. Okabe quickly murders him. R.I.P. Mr. Grainer, you will not be missed. I would put his card into hell, but it seems he was already there, so... Mark is rightfully freaked out and Dr. Okabe gives him Grainer's keycard. This keycard is black, unlike the blue and the green ones we've seen before. Mr. Milkshake also has a black keycard. Speaking of Mr. Milkshake, he runs down the expected lifetime of the new door by opening and closing it a bunch. He gets the flashcard that Dylan hid under the toilet and then he welcomes Dylan at the elevator, which he tends to do whenever he wants to control someone the second they walk into the 7th floor, and he won't tell Dylan the name of his son. That's a bad idea. Hayley has gotten to 75% on her Sienna file and is rewarded with a music dance experience. That's exactly as weird as it sounds. They will be able to dance for 5 minutes. What a reward.
You may choose one genre and one accessory. The maraca.
She chooses the maraca, which honestly, me too, girl. Good choice. The genre she chooses is called Defiant Jazz. Dancing ensues in what can only be described as highly enjoyable television. Have a look.
Okay.
Shit.
He's behind me, isn't he? Mr. Milkshake is the goat of the show. He makes the entire plot so much more fun. The actor does a really good job with him and I hope he wins all the awards. Dylan freaks out and bites Mr. Milkshake, the macro data refinement calamity. This is the only time we see Mr. Milkshake shaken up, but he quickly snaps back into it and he says this.
The music dance experience is officially cancelled.
Dylan tells the team about the overtime contingency. They think that the controls for this are in the security room and Mark knows where it is because Petey once saw it during a fire alarm and he told Mark. They use Mr. Grainer's keycard, which Audi Mark brought into work to open the new MDR door. Dylan stays behind an MDR while Irving goes to flirt with Bert. Hayley and Mark go to the security office, which they say is a ways past the perpetuity wing. Right here. So even a mega corporation like Lumen is understaffed. Seems like nobody wants to work these days, huh? In the security room, we see abbreviations of other department names and also how many people they have. I will list them all here on the screen, but most of them do not have an explanation as of yet. Back in MDR, the team makes a concept of a plan where Dylan will go to the security office after hours to try and trigger the overtime contingency, while the other 3 are outside so that they can ask for help. They decide that the best time to do this is at the end of the quarter, where one of them gets a waffle party. Mrs. Cobell learns that Mr. Grainer is dead, and we learn that the Eagans have a gala next week. Who doesn't love a good gala on television? Irving learns that Bert is retiring, and he watches a video from Audi Bert, who thanks all his co-workers that he has never met. Then Irving rightfully says this.
You're all just gonna stand here and let him die?
For the innies, retiring is the same as dying, so people should be sad. At least Irving dares to call it out.
You can stay for Bert's party and support his transition.
Transition, you say? Imagine someone's Audi transitions. Will the innie be confused? They've probably not understood the concept of dysphoria yet because they've been alive for so short. Much to consider.
Let's burn this place to the ground.
At the very end of the episode, they show Mark's wife, but she's out of focus. But then they show her in focus and turns out it's Mrs. Casey. But I thought she died in a car accident 2 years ago. Well, apparently she's alive on the 7th floor and she's a part-time innie. Could she be one of the people PD said lived there permanently? Maybe Gemma has that because of brain damage, but the Severance ship keeps Mrs. Casey alive and that's how she's able to live on the 7th floor. Either way, it's weird that she's down here, right? And this explains a little bit of the behavior of Mrs. Cobell around Mark. Just this episode, Mrs. Selvig goes to Devon's house and she asks this.
Does Mark ever think he sees her?
She seems really invested in Mark's dead wife. Maybe she's trying to see if love can transcend severance. She seems really invested in everything having to do with reintegration. Maybe she used to be severed and now she wants to be reintegrated. That could be something. Something fun to note in this episode is that at Bert's retirement party there's a lot of watermelon to eat. And in an earlier episode, MDR also had watermelon. So it seems that Lumen is giving them watermelon as a sort of good food to reward them for doing good. I'm also left wondering, where do all the people from Optics and Design come from? If they use the same elevator as MDR, then surely MDR would have ran into them at some point, right? So they seem to have their own elevator, maybe it's this. Episode 8 starts with Audi Irving and he has a dog named Radar. He is apparently a painter, and what does he paint? He paints the same mysterious hallway over and over and over again using a lot of black paint. Could this elevator be somewhere on the 7th floor? And could that mean that there is a floor below the 7th floor? It's not unlikely considering how big this place actually is. The original pilot had Mark climb to another floor through the storage closet, so the idea of multiple floors is not that far-fetched. My personal theory on why Irving keeps painting the same thing is because he wants to repeat it so that it will seep through his memory to the innie. Maybe he wants the innie to look for the elevator. Inside MDR, Hayley is the only one who's currently working on a file because the others have already finished. This is unrealistic because when I'm done with my work, my boss just gives me something new to work on. Maybe Lumen is not so bad after all. They are all waiting for Hayley to be done with her work.
I just wonder if it might be helpful for us to stand behind her and perhaps chant her name.
Hayley gets to 100% and gets a nice clear animation. Mrs. Cobell tells Mark that one of them gets to get a waffle party and he chooses Dylan because that's part of their plan. Mark gets another wellness session with Mrs. Casey, who appears to be retiring. We now know that Mrs. Casey is Audi Mark's wife, so the interactions play differently to us as the viewer. Neither of them recognize each other, and Mrs. Casey tells Mark that she has only been alive for 107 hours. Most of those hours are spent telling lies towards innies about what the Audis do. Your Audi likes turtles. Your Audi knows how to crawl. Your Audi enjoys breathing air. Mrs. Cobell then instructs Mr. Milchick to take Mrs. Casey down to the testing floor. Down, you say? I wonder if that's via... Yep, it is. It's the same elevator that Irving has been painting. We don't know where it is though. MDR has a pre-waffle egg party and I'm suspicious that the eggs were laid by the goats. Mrs. Cobell gets fired by the board after they learn that Hayley tried to off herself. The team goes over the plan one more time.
The important thing is you find someone it seems you can trust and you tell them everything.
Hold on. Hayley kisses Mark. Okay, we all saw this coming, but I like this romance. Even though it's more of a situationship, I still like it. Dylan gets some waffles and they look pretty good, but this is just waffles. Where's the party? Well, this is where Dylan puts on a Keir Egan mask, he gets a whip, and he gets to tame the 4 tempers that come in as strippers. This is really weird and kind of disturbing. I think they're supposed to have sex, but Dylan leaves for the security office. Notably, Dylan has had 2 waffle parties before, so he's done this twice. And he's been underselling it for sure. He gets to the security office and successfully manages to trigger the overtime contingency. Good job, Dylan. Right before this, we learn that Audi Mark is thinking of quitting their job. Killing Mark. Something fun this episode is that Irving ruins a book by placing one of the codex inside of it for some reason. The 9th episode of the season is also the finale. Last episode left us with Dylan triggering the overtime contingency to awaken Hayley, Mark and Irving on the outside. Going into this episode, I'm wondering just how long Dylan is going to be able to hold these triggers.
This
better be working.
If this was me, I would fold in under 5 minutes, so the team better make good use of those 5 minutes. We first see Mark when he is at a book reading party from Rickon, and he is talking to Mrs. Selvig, but Mark knows her as Mrs. Cobell.
Mark?
Yeah.
You sure you're okay?
This must be very confusing for Mark. He manages to get away from Mrs. Selvig and talk to this woman, which we know is Mark's sister, but he doesn't know that yet. He quickly manages to figure it out though. When Irving awakens, he is painting and he finds all the paintings that Audie Irving has made. He also finds his dog Radar and he pets him. He also explores his house and finds a bunch of medals. When Hayley awakens, she is at the Egan Gala, talking to Natalie. Apparently, she is supposed to give a speech in 20 minutes. Surely Dylan can hold on for 20 minutes, right? We learn that Audie Hayley's real name is Helena Egan.
This is Helena Egan.
She is an Egan, an imposter. Hayley must be so confused that her Audie is also her boss. Mark asks his sister to speak privately, but instead of telling her that he is in Mark right now, like if you had any sense of urgency, he spends 10 minutes sitting through a book reading, as if Dylan isn't dying out here. The whole time I'm screaming, Mark, tell someone, just tell someone. Don't sit down, Mark, tell someone, have some sense of urgency. He discovers that the writer of the contraband book is his brother-in-law, Rickon, and he is in awe. And this is where I'm wondering, what exactly is a book reading? Why do they all have their own books? Why are they not listening to Rickon read the book? Is that not why you're there? Hayley, as Helena Egan, meets the lady that Devon had a crush on back at the birthing cottage. And we learn that Devon's intuition was right. She was in fact severed for childbirth. She enters the gala and sees a big display of Hayley, the severed story, which makes it seem that her experience at Lumen was good instead of the disaster that it actually was. Turns out Helena went in as Hayley as a PR stunt to prove to people like, say, Congress, that severance isn't actually a bad thing. She really risked her fingers for that? Mark talks to Rickon during a reflection break, and he tells Rickon how much he enjoyed the book. He's trying to gauge if Rickon and him are friends so that he can tell him that he is Innie Mark. However, before he can do that, he gets interrupted, and I'm upset that Mark still hasn't told anyone. He's had so much opportunity. Mark has a short talk with Mrs. Selvig and he calls her Mrs. Cobell at the end. So now Mrs. Cobell knows that Mark is Innie Mark. Mark is trying to talk to Devon, but she has a baby emergency, so she needs a few minutes. Mark, just tell her, Dylan is dying out here. Mrs. Cobell takes Devon's baby so that Devon can finally talk to Mark. Hayley is walking through the gala and presumably hates her Audie even more now. For her, I understand why she's not telling anyone. Anyone here could be loyal to Lumen or to the Egans. She enters the bedroom and is confronted by her father, James Egan. You must recognize this guy from the perpetuity ring.
Helena.
He seems to care about her and he is proud of her that she continued to PR stunt even though Hayley tried to hurt Helena. He also says, one day you will sit with me at my revolving. I don't know what this means, but I assume it has something to do with the Egans getting their consciousness uploaded into one chip or something. Maybe into the mind? He drew this for a reason, didn't he? And he says to Helena that everyone in the world will get a chip thanks to her. Irving searches his belongings and he finds a bunch of newspaper articles about Lumen and about the severance procedure. He also finds a list of severed employees and Bert is on it. So it seems that Irving's Audie is actually a pretty cool guy who's trying to investigate Lumen. He also finds Bert's address, so he decides to take a car, even though he's never driven, and go to Bert's house. We cut to Mark and he has told his sister everything. Honestly, I hate this. The writers just skip right over Mark telling his sister what's going on. This is the most pivotal scene in the entire show, something that every fan has waited for since the start of episode 1, and they skip just right over it. Did the writers not know how to write this scene? I understand that most shows do this kind of stuff with explanatory scenes, but still, it's disappointing to see. Mark wonders why Audie Mark severed himself.
I just want to know why. Why he put me in there.
We find out that Devon and Gemma were actually pretty close. They go over some options on what to do now and they decide they need to be quiet and smart about it. Mark mentions Mrs. Cobell, his boss, is at this party, and Devon realizes he gave her baby to a Lumenite. And now the baby is gone. Mrs. Cobell has been trying to call Mr. Milchick and he finally answers. She tells him that the overtime contingency has been triggered, so he makes a run for it to the security room. But when he gets there, the door is tied shut with a belt or something. And Dylan is still holding strong.
Dylan! Dylan! Dylan, why are you doing this, man? I can get you any perk you want, Dylan. Hey, there's stuff you don't even know about. There's paintball.
Irving gets to Audie Bird's house only to find out that Audie Bird has a wife. Just kidding, he has a husband, so Irving's man is taken. Mrs. Cobell gets to Hayley before she enters the stage at the gala and threatens her. However, Hayley enters the stage anyways. Mr. Milchick gets into the security room and tackles Dylan. In his last moments, Irving bangs on Bird's door to try and talk to him, but then he gets flipped back to Audie Irving. Oh no, Hayley speaks a few sentences to everyone at the gala and they are important. Saying that they are hurting her down there and that they are prisoners surely must make some sort of waves. She gets tackled by Natalie and she flips back to Helena Egan at this very moment. So that's two people getting tackled at the same time. Mark finds a picture of Audie Mark's wife and he takes it into a room full of people and he yells, "She's alive!
She's alive!
Good job, Annie Mark. That's exactly what you needed to do and you did it. And this is where the season ends. Mark and Hayley successfully told someone about the situation on the Sabbath floor. And Irving successfully broke his own heart. What an ending, and having to wait 2 entire years to find out what the consequences of this are. Luckily for us though, season 2 is airing right now. Some thoughts about the season is that the 5 questions that were asked at the very start of the season included the question, what is Mr. Egan's favorite breakfast? And this is of particular note because Hayley is actually Mr. Egan's family.
Question 4. What is Mr. Egan's favorite breakfast?
That one makes no sense.
Helena and Hayley are an interesting take on nature versus nurture because Audie Hayley is cold and rude and says that Hayley is not a person. But Innie Hayley doesn't have any of this indoctrination from James Egan, her father, and so she's actually kind of a good person. Innie Hayley is who Helena would have been if she had not been an Egan and did not have all this pressure growing up. The Innies are kind of a pure version of the person. Overall, I find that the Innies are more fun to watch than Mark's Audie, but that's mostly because the Innies are mysterious and important. Mr. Milchick was the biggest standout this season, but all of MDR was fun to watch. They did a really good job with them. Special shout out to Devon, she is great too. I wonder what Mrs. Cobell is going to be doing next season, because she's been fired, but she was also the only one who was actually on top of things, so surely they will take her back. I think the show did really good with the mystery aspect of it. We haven't really had a good mystery show like this since Lost was airing, and that was a long time ago. Sometimes it's hard to tell if the writers have everything planned out, or if their plans have question marks too. But they're doing a really good job building up the mystery and keeping us engaged with it. This is one of the best shows that I've watched this year. Don't forget to like and subscribe, or I will send you to the break room. I will be doing another deep dive review after season 2 ends, so stay tuned.